My name's Paul Smith. I'm the discussion papers editor for the Royal Statistical Society's journals. At least I am at the moment. So I'm just coming to the end of a four-year term, and we'll stop being that at the end of December. So this is almost the last thing that I will do, at least publicly, as discussion papers editor. I'd like to welcome you all to this demo. A demo is short for, with a little bit of poetic license, discussion meetings overview. And the idea of a demo is that it provides an introduction to the topic of a discussion paper in a more gentle way than just jumping straight into what can be some quite challenging material. So actually, I love the title of the slide that's here. A gentle introduction to differential privacy is exactly what's needed. The idea of demos was originally dreamt up by the Young Statisticians section, so we should acknowledge them for thinking of that. That was a really good innovation. We've been having those. I'm really pleased that Jinshuo, who's one of the authors of tonight's paper, has agreed to come and give us a gentle starter. The idea is to provide some of the background so that it's easier to understand the discussion meeting itself, which takes place at 5 o'clock in an hour and a half's time. Just a couple of details, I guess housekeeping details. So the meeting is being recorded. If for any reason you want to contribute in some way but don't want your contribution to be published sometime if we make this recording available, then please do let us know. If you're not speaking, then please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. Keep them like that during the presentation. You can use the chat, a little box with some lines in, a little speech bubble with some lines in, to ask questions as we go along, and I'll keep an eye on that, and if something's needed, then I'll interrupt the speaker. But in general, we should probably have some more time for questions and discussion at the end, if you have some. I think that's all the main things I need to say. So I'm just welcome to Jinshuo. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and do this. We really appreciate it. And over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to speak here. A little bit about myself. I am Jinshuo Dong. I'm currently a postdoc at IDEO Institute, joint held at Northwestern University and PDI Chicago. So I graduated with a PhD degree in applied math this May from UPenn under the supervision of Aaron Ross, which is a collaborator on the paper. Okay, so the title is a gentle introduction to DP, because I think the field differential privacy is relatively less known outside of the community, but I think there's a lot to do as a statistician or applied mathematician. Hopefully, I can convince you that after the presentation. So here's the outline. First, I'm going to try to motivate the problem of privacy in data analysis and the notion of differential privacy. And then we'll look at some building blocks, fundamentals of this area. And if we have time, I want to introduce the problem of trust models. In the end, I'll give you some further reviews. Okay. So I'll start with several examples, but most of the examples I talk about will be concerning the US. It's not my intent. It's just because people around me keep talking about it. If you guys can tell me stories in other parts of the world, for example, UK, I would be very interested to hear about it. And by the way, at least myself, I'm personally comfortable if you have questions and interrupt me. So feel free to interrupt me anytime. Okay, so I suppose everyone here heard about Netflix, which is a streaming company that try very hard to keep you on their website. So they keep recommending you movies or TV series that you might like. This brings them perfect. This has been casted as a low-rank matrix completion problem and has developed into a very successful and fruitful field that connects statistics, optimization, and machine learning. The task is just look at this left table here. Netflix already have some observations whether you like the movie or not. And the task is simply to fill in the blanks so that they can figure out whether you like the new movie or not. So in order to fill in the blank in a better way and waste your time more efficiently, the CEO of Netflix said, maybe we can exploit the cheap laborers in academia. So they published this data set and said whoever improves the recommendation system gets some money. So being aware of the privacy issue, they actually anonymized the data. And that is what everybody would believe should work, right? Privacy just looks only like a legislative issue, and anonymization, proper anonymization should work. By anonymization, we mean not only remove the username or actual name, but also credit card information, things like that. But in 2008, two researchers showed that you can actually make use of public information and re-identify, de-anonymize the anonymized data set. So what they do is, I think quite simple. So there's IMDb data. For example, you may have watched some movie on Netflix, but not on IMDb. Those are you don't want to make public. But they can simply compare this to data set, and with significant probability, you will they can figure out which role. Sorry, so I should say that each role corresponds to one user. Here we know which role corresponds to which person, and here we don't know. They show that we can connect these two roles and figure out the anonymized data, who is who. So this has a significant impact. Netflix canceled its second competition for this specific reason. Okay, so this example tells you that anonymization did not work. But maybe you ask, who cares about watching history? Well, you may not care about it, but some like sexual minorities or people with political opinions that are unpopular in their country or community, they may care about it. Okay? So even if this Netflix example may not, if it's not convincing enough, then there's another example. So this guy used to be the governor of Massachusetts, and he once thinks that the medical data of his state employees might be something good to dig about. Maybe might be an opportunity to new scientific discovery. So he published the medical records, anonymized, including his own data. Okay, and then Natanya Sweeney saw the opportunity or problem actually. And several days after they published the medical record, the governor actually received his own one in his mailbox. So if you think watching history is not important, I guess medical record is something you should care about. This happened in 1997. So you can see that people rediscovered the fact that anonymization doesn't work over and over again. So this suggests that we need to pay more attention if we want to mine the data about people at all. Okay, so at this point, you may think publishing the whole data set is something too good to be true. But maybe we can just release summary statistics. Well, there's another example. Well, I'm actually not very familiar with the context, so I will not go into too much detail. So in microarray data analysis, it's standard to release the MAF, minority allele frequencies, which is sample mean. To me, it's just a bunch of vectors, and we release the mean of all of the vectors, high-dimensional vectors. In 2008, Homer et al. Shocked the genetic community by showing that even if you are only releasing MAFs, which is sample mean, it's still not private. And this also has a major consequence. NIH of the United States took measures immediately. Originally, this kind of data used to be open access, but now the access is subject to approval. You need to submit a form, then you look at the data. Well, this might be a little too abstract. Let me be more specific. In this example, this whole process should credit to Professor Lin Zhang from Rutgers. Basically, the following example that I'm going to go into a little bit detail is a simplified version of the Homer et al. Privacy attack. Okay, so let's think about the following scenario. Oh, so sorry, it's not a scenario. So this is real data. Okay, so we have a data set, genetic data set about some sort of disease. We have 136 patients. Each patient has this much SNP, 340,000 SNPs. So high-dimensional data. So you can think of the data set is divided into 3 parts. One is obtained from a specific hospital. Consists of 50 patients. And this out part, you can simply think of it as so the data source is not important. It's not from this hospital, okay? It's from some other source. And this reference data, 36 patients, these are public open access data. Okay. So what I'm telling is not a true story. Okay. Let's think about a scenario where somehow you obtained a genetic data in this dimension, and you want to figure out this person, whether he was in the study from this hospital or not. Well, I think an amusing example is, suppose, say, I am Donald Trump, and I somehow figure out the SNP data of Joe Biden. And so there's not enough evidence from his SNP that he has a certain disease or medical condition. But if I can infer that he was in the study, he went to this hospital, then it's more likely that he has some medical condition, which will become a privacy leak of Joe Biden. Okay, so now Donald Trump's task is to figure out this data, Joe Biden's data. Why was it in the study or not? What he can observe is the released mean. So as we suggest, maybe we can release the sample mean, right? So this is released by the hospital, and we have public access to the reference data, so we can compute this thing by ourselves. So based on this data, can we figure out whether Joe Biden was here or here? That is the question. The answer is we can almost tell it apart for sure. So the process is so this is the sample mean in the hospital data set. This is a sample mean in the open access data set. We take the difference and the inner product with, say, Joe Biden's data. So if he was in the study data set of the hospital, then it's the red scatters. If he was not, then it will be the blue dots. We see that this value is large when it's in the data set, and it's small, it's close to 0 when it's not in the data set. So we have a pretty clear idea about whether he was in the study or not. So this is not good. Okay. Well, the rescue, the solution will be so you don't release this exact sample mean. You add some noise to it. You perturb it by a little. That is, you compute the mean and add some Gaussian noise. We will see that this is called the Gaussian mechanism. So this is not invented by Stephen Feinberg, but he is the one that introduces this thing into the genetic study to protect privacy. Okay, so after the perturbation, the red and blue dots looks like this. So now it's very hard to tell whether Joe Biden was in the data set or not. At least not by the previous this very naive method. And we will see that in a sense we can sort of probably show that it is not possible to infer whether Joe Biden was in the data set. Okay, so here is the end of the examples. We are getting into a more formal, more mathematical Beamer style. So the rigorous approach to show there's no way to figure out whether you are in the data set or not is exactly what differential privacy provides. But this is a formal framework, so we need some notation and language. So noisy mean is a random mapping. Okay, so here n is sample size, number of people in the data set. P is dimension. So computing the perturbed sample mean simply involves compute the mean first and then perturb with a norm. So you're not going to get a deterministic vector here. You're going to get a probability distribution on which is a normal distribution. Well, the two hypothetical scenario is like one is Joe Biden is in the data set, and the other is Joe Biden was not in the data set. Okay, and the difference is, maybe I shouldn't say 1 to n. You can think of x prime as x 1 through n removed by 1. So the only difference of these two data sets is a certain role which corresponds to the vector 1. Okay, so if the two scenarios lead to similar distribution, similar output distribution, then it's hard to tell whether this data vector y was in the study or not. Okay, so here I mean so if we go back to one slide, we can observe that the two distributions are with noise they are similar, but without noise they are not similar. Okay, so that's what we want to achieve by adding noise. The two distributions are similar. Okay, the formal definition of differential privacy is proposed by, since the work, Frank McCreary, Alan Smith in 2006. This N is cognizant. Okay, we have seen that perturb the mean as a randomized algorithm. Okay, so this thing is epsilon delta dp if the following probability inequality holds. When it's computed on one data set, it has one distribution. When it's computed on the other, it has a different distribution. The two distributions are similar in the following sense. So in order to understand this, let's first set epsilon and delta to be 0. Okay, this is 1, this is 0. So we have this probability less than this probability. But because D and D prime are so-called neighboring data sets, D and D prime are symmetric. So you not only have less than or equal to, you also have greater than or equal to. So when epsilon and delta are 0, you get the two probabilities are the same. And this E is any event. So what do we get? We get this distribution and this distribution are the same. Okay, so when epsilon and delta are the same, this M doesn't really depend on input. MD and MD prime are the same distribution. So we have perfect primacy. You can imagine when epsilon and delta are small, well, this approximately holds, so the two distributions are close or similar. So small parameter means strong privacy, large parameter means little privacy. If you look at a one-dimensional example, adding Gaussian noise, then we see that when the noise is small, we have the distinction of two distributions are significant. Okay, but if you add larger noise, then they are more similar. So larger noise means more privacy means smaller parameter epsilon delta. So you can see that there is a trade-off between the noise, which is your accuracy, and your privacy. So the less accuracy, the more privacy. There's this trade-off, ubiquitous in differential privacy. And that is one fundamental question that we want to understand for each statistics task. What is the Pareto curve of privacy and accuracy? But that's a separate question. There's a vast literature. We are not going into that. Okay, so any question about the definition? Okay, cool. We're going to have a different interpretation. So please come to our formal presentation. Okay, so this is a well-accepted framework. It's accepted by Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and LinkedIn. And then this list is only increasing. And also accepted by the government. The U.S. Census Bureau is actually they're doing the 2020 census of the U.S. and they're applying this thing. Okay, so far I have argued that privacy is not trivial. Releasing summer statistics can also be dangerous, not only naive anonymization. Adding noise seems to be a good idea in releasing summer statistics, and this exactly falls into the differential privacy framework. And now, so these are ideas. We need to answer more precise questions. Okay, so epsilon and delta they measure closeness of distributions, but how close is close? So we need to understand the parameters epsilon and delta. Well, I will leave this question to the discussion meeting, not to the demo. But given epsilon and delta, so how do we determine the noise level? Of course, you can add like infinite noise, and that's definitely private enough. But we want to determine the smallest possible noise level, so we need to do some calculation. In particular, why do we need this delta? This delta seems to be more or less unnatural. Can we do delta equals 0? And it's also unclear. Like all we are doing is perturbing real vectors, but it's unclear if we try to release non-numeric valued statistics. For example, the mode. It's unclear whether it fits into the DP framework. So we are going to try to understand, answer this question. And the plan is to first tell you algorithm for numeric statistics involving Gaussian mechanism and Laplace mechanism. A Gaussian mechanism is adding Gaussian noise. The Laplace mechanism is adding Laplace noise. There's nothing fancy about it. And non-numeric statistics involves the so-called exponential mechanism. It's also something already considered in, I don't know, statistics, physics. We're not touching the deep nature of it. Okay, anyway, let's start with numeric statistics. For simplicity, let's suppose the dimension is 1. Okay. So suppose you want to compute this f, think of f as the sample mean. Okay, so given n, so think of x as r to the p. We may want to compute the sample mean among all the n data points. Okay. For privacy, we are going to add some noise, c. In the end, we need that f of d plus the noise and f of d prime plus the noise are close in distribution in absolute sense. And this has to hold, I to mention that in the definition. So in the definition, the quantifier over all possible d and d prime. Okay, so we try to protect all possible scenarios. What is Joe Biden or Donald Trump or me? Okay, so there's a quantifier in front of d and d prime. This has to hold for arbitrary d and d prime. So why do we add noise? It needs to add the noise needs to mask the signal ft minus f of d prime. Okay. Otherwise, if c is significantly smaller than this, then it's very easy to tell apart whether it was the f of d prime or f. So in general, so this shows you that the noise scale needs to scale proportional to this quantity. Okay? And in general, it is impossible if this difference can be arbitrarily large. Okay? So think of these two means are arbitrarily far away. Then you need to add like infinite amount of noise. So this suggests the crucial quantity is sensitivity. Okay, so let me define that. For our target, say sample mean, its sensitivity is defined as follows. Okay, so we evaluate on two neighboring data sets. So this is the change by swapping out one of the data points among all n people. We take the we look at how much it changes by changing 1%. So the sensitivity is the upper bound of that, or supremum of that. Okay, so oftentimes this sensitivity is not finite. So for example, for sample mean, it's possible that there is a data that affects this f arbitrarily. But there's always, you can always clip your data to a level that it doesn't really matter, so that the sensitivity is fine. And further, without loss of granularity, we can assume the sensitivity is 1 for just for pedagogical reasons. Otherwise, you can scale out the noise by the sensitivity. So is that clear? Okay, so now, starting from now, we're going to assume that the sensitivity is 1. So now our question, we have simplified our problem. Now we we say, so we use the Gaussian mechanism, we add Gaussian noise, normal 0 sigma square, what epsilon and delta do we get? So if we understand this question, we can, for example, well, I should say that epsilon delta is a social choice. There's no gold standard for epsilon delta. But if the society has picked epsilon delta for us, then we can determine sigma by solving backwards. So that's the point to understand this question. Okay, so the Gaussian mechanism is very simple. Just compute your desired f and add Gaussian noise. Now we need to figure out, we want this mechanism to satisfy this probability inequality in the definition, right? And here we want to figure out what kind of epsilon delta makes it valid. Okay, let's plug it in to the probability inequality. So M of D is simply a normal distribution centered at f of D, and this centered at f of D prime. So we want this to hold for arbitrary D and D prime. But intuitively, the worst case is obviously, because we already assume that the sensitivity is 1, so these two things differ at most by 1. Okay, the worst case must happen when they actually differ by 1. Okay, so that's intuitive. So without lots of granularity, we can assume one of them is 0 and the other is 1. Otherwise, we can translate the two things to be 0. Okay, there are 2 parameters. Let's fix one of them and figure out what is the best possible the other one. We are going to fix epsilon and figure out what is the smallest delta. People usually fix delta and figure out what is the optimal epsilon. Well, you can try that. That is significantly harder than this approach. But anyway, so now we have made significant simplification. Now the two distribution we want to investigate is just simply normal 0 sigma squared and normal 1 sigma squared. Okay. And we have fixed epsilon. We just want to figure out what is delta. However, the difficulty comes from this event. We want this inequality host for arbitrary event. Okay. So we need to remove the quantifier for E. So this has been a little bit technical, so please feel free to interrupt me if you get lost. I want to make sure that you understand the basic logic.
There is a question in the chat which is asking a couple of slides back whether X is compact.
Whether X, which X, this X?
I think so. It's not my question.
You can think of X as R2. So simplest example of X is R, real number. So it's not compact. In general, this thing is not going to be finite. So in order to make it finite, this F, for example, the sample mean doesn't have a finite sensitivity, but the trimmed mean has a finite sensitivity. Or median has a finite sensitivity if the data comes from a bounded range. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are ways to make this function to have finite sensitivity and does not affect statistical efficiency significantly. Okay. Is that the only question?
Yeah, that's all so far. And thanks for that answer.
Okay. Next, let me get back to.
There's another one just arrived in the chat actually. So Here we assume fixed data. What, if n, is large, x is random, and delta f tends to be large? You may want to look in the chat to get a better feel for this question.
Okay, so I guess this is very uncomfortable for statisticians to assume that the data is fixed. So for privacy, people have the argument that we should not. So the privacy should not rely on the distributional assumption on the data set, because so we don't know whether that's true or not. Privacy is like a security guarantee. We would like that like there's no distributional assumption on it. So that is why we make no distributional assumptions. On a separate issue, for the same mechanism, you can also consider its statistical efficiency. And for that part, it's very safe, and no one's going to object to you if you make a distributional assumptions. And there's another question: do you always have d and d prime just differ by one individual? That is true. So did I answer the questions? Yeah, I know it's a little bit weird to not assume any randomness on the data, because that is baked into statisticians' mind. Yeah, but privacy is a different issue. Okay, so if you are good, let's try to move on. Thanks for the questions. Please interrupt me anytime. Now I know how to monitor the chat box. Okay, so let's get back to our mathematical question. So we want to remove this E here. Okay, let's introduce some notations. Let this probability distribution be P and this one be Q. Okay, so we simplify the notation. So this is P of E and this is Q of E. We want to know. So remember, we fixed epsilon. We want to figure out delta. Okay, so we move this part to the left hand side. We get P of E minus E to epsilon Q of E. Okay, so we want this thing to hold for any E. So what is the smallest possible delta? That is the supremum of this quantity over E. Let's write it out using density. Okay, this is straightforward. Okay, so what is the supremum? Which set contains the supremum? It's actually very simple, because just whenever it's positive, you count it into E. Whenever it's negative, you don't want it. So E is the location where this quantity is positive. Okay, so you have probably already noticed that I'm almost performing the proof of Neyman-Pearson lemma. But anyway, we don't. So we are going to make a formal connection in the discussion meeting. But for this moment, let's just work with this expression. Okay, so the supremum is equal to. Okay, so I plug this thing in. This is where they are negative, so that where they are positive. So it's like we are integrating the positive part of this function. Okay, so this parenthesis subscript plus is the positive part. Okay, we are almost done here. So far, we have proved that Gaussian mechanism with noise standard deviation sigma satisfies epsilon delta dp, where delta has this expression. Okay, so now, so the rest, we already know that like the P is the density of this thing, Q is the density of this thing. These are simple expressions, so we can work it out. There are no quantifiers. We can just do the calculation. So working out the tedious math, we have this thing where capital phi is normal CDF. Okay, not too bad, but it's still quite an expression. So if you're interested, you can try to show that it's monotone in sigma, which shows that, for example, if you add more noise, you should have stronger privacy. So sigma should be smaller. So sigma increase, delta decreases. It's not obvious from this expression, but if you indeed want a simple proof, then there is one in our paper. Okay, so that's it for Gaussian mechanism. So I've showed you that how to work with the definition, how to figure out the epsilon delta. So I hope there's no mystery about it. Next, we consider Laplace mechanism. It's easy to see that delta is never zero for any sigma in epsilon. And there's another easy way to figure it out. Suppose we can set delta to be zero, then what we need is, this thing less than this thing. There's no plus delta. And it's easy to see that that is equivalent to the density ratio is bounded by e to the epsilon. Okay, almost everywhere for x. So going from here to here, I guess, is quite straightforward. But going from here to here is also like straightforward. Because suppose this is not true. This thing is greater than epsilon on a set that has positive measure. Then on that set, you're not going to have this inequality. So these two are equivalent. You can trust me on that. So based on this, you can verify that if Q is a normal, P is another normal with the same standard deviation, then this thing will be a linear function. It's not going to be bounded by a number. So Gaussian noise doesn't work. But it looks like a exponential should work. Like the density is e to the minus x, something like that. This looks like it's going to work. Okay. So in order to make it symmetric, we consider double-sided exponential, also known as Laplace noise. And this seems to be a good candidate. Let's take a closer look. The density looks like this. There's a scaling parameter b, and we need that. So recall that p and q are okay. So maybe I should put more notations. So recall that we were interested in normal 0 sigma square and normal 1 sigma square. So now we are interested in Laplace, no longer normal but Laplace. Laplace 1 with some standard deviation, and Laplace 0 with some standard deviation. Using the equivalent we go from here to here. So that's how we end up with this expression. Yeah, I apologize for going too fast on this step. Any questions? Do we have to spend more time on it? Okay. We can expand it out. It's actually very simple. The ratio is simply has this form. We want this to be bounded by epsilon. It's quite easy to observe that when b equals epsilon inverse, it suffices. Okay, Laplace mechanism does give you epsilon 0 dp, and this is quite a simple argument. So it looks like delta equals 0 looks very nice. Why bother considering delta not equal to 0? So the reason is we have set the dimension to be 1. Okay? And such good things are not no longer there when the dimension is high. You can sort of get this flavor in the discussion meeting, but we are also preparing a draft manuscript on precisely this phenomenon. So stay tuned. Okay, so far we have argued that the sensitivity is the quantity that governs, sorry, this should be that, governs private release of numerical statistics. Well, it requires some transition for statisticians because the data set are assumed to be deterministic. There's no randomness. There's a for all quantifier. There's no distribution on it. Okay, Laplace mechanism satisfies absent 0 dp. Gaussian mechanism satisfies absent delta, and we managed to figure out, like, given other parameters, given absent and delta, given absent and noise sigma, how to determine the optimal delta. With this ability, we can try to solve for the optimal noise level sigma when a certain level of delta is given. Okay. I guess I'm running out of time. Let me just tell you that there is a way to privatize non-numerical value statistics. So, sorry, there are a lot of typos here. So why can we perturb a real number so easily? It's because real number is a metric space. There's a metric space. So if I compute from the data set to like a discrete set, unstructured, how do we perturb it and have dp? So we need an additional structure to measure distance of the choice in one, which is a quality score. So the quality score measures how the data set, how this item y fits the data set. Okay, so if the value is large, then the input y fits the data set well. Otherwise, it's not. Let me give you an example. So that x and y, they are both the collection of math, stats, CS, social science, the 4 majors. Okay, so let's think about we have many people in the chat room. Each one comes with a major. Okay, and we want to figure out which is the most common major. So let Q be, so this D is our data set. Everyone has a major. Y is a certain other major. So Q of dy is a number of people in the data set that majors in one. Okay, so if that thing is large, then this y fits the data set. Or I should break the line here. If f of d is the argmax of the q, okay, so that is the maximizer of this value. That means that is the most common major in the data set. Okay, so we're actually computing some kind of a mode here. So what I'm saying is, using this kind of structure, we can express useful statistics. So exponential mechanism with the quality score and parameter is sort of a random mapping. So let's try to read this definition. Now I'll give examples later. So the output of dataset D is y with probability e to the quality score. Okay, so if the quality score is large, then the probability is large proportionally. Okay. So the observation is, okay, so if we set beta to be 0, then this proportion is always 1. So everything is output with uniform probability. Okay. No matter what D is. Well, think of Y as a uniform, as a finite set. So, so this probability will be 1 over the size of 1. Okay. So beta equals 0 corresponds to uniform over 1. That does not depend on the data set, so we have perfect privacy and but low quality because we're just randomly picking an arbitrary choice. When beta goes to infinity, it's kind of easy to observe that this probability mass is going to concentrate on the maximizer in Y. Okay, so we already see that F is the maximizer. So M is going to be the maximizer, the mode. There's no randomness, so there's no privacy, and but we have the best quality possible because what we want to compute is M. So a finite beta interpolates between these two cases. Okay. The next question I might not be able to answer in time is, given you a beta, how do you determine the privacy property of this mechanism? Remember that it depends on the parameter beta and it also depends on the property of the Q, quality score. The classical theory uses the sensitivity again, but it turns out that there's some disadvantage. I might not have time to go over it, but the remedy is not to consider the sensitivity. Instead, consider something else, very similar to sensitivity. And then we're going to have good qualities, good properties of the exponential mechanism. So if you want to read more details, you can check out my blog post at this address or our SNL 2020 paper. So I recommend starting this the first blog post. Okay. So far I've argued that it's possible to do numerical statistics. It's also possible to do non-numerical statistics, although I didn't have time to go into detail. But regardless of these technical questions, there's also a common criticism to differential privacy. Regardless of all of the technical, regardless of the meaning of F delta, there's also another issue, which I think involves interesting questions, and I believe statisticians should be able to do something in this part. So in DP, you need to give all the data to the mechanism, to the algorithm, and trust it to work as expected. Otherwise, there's no privacy guarantee. Okay, so you really need to trust a central agent to do everything. So this is called the central model. And if you are not willing to do that, there's an approach called randomized response. Basically, suppose I want to investigate how many people are evading tax. If you ask people, did you evade tax ever? They're likely going to tell you no. So to protect their privacy, you can allow the following. So you can let them flip a coin, and if it's head, then they tell the truth. Otherwise, they tell the opposite. And there's a simple probability exercise that if you use a biased coin, you can actually extract an estimate of the true population of those who evaded tax. So this is called randomized response. We don't respond the truth, you respond with randomization. So the idea is you don't report your true data. You use some local randomization, and that helps protect your privacy. And this can also be measured in the differential privacy fashion, epsilon delta. This is called the local model. In this model, you don't have to trust the central agent. You can guarantee that your data is randomized, and only let the central agent do the computation and not see the original data. But okay, so the computational model is local randomization for each one of the people, and then do the calculation by algorithm. But there's a disadvantage. So in the central model, you only need to add a relatively little noise compared to the statistical fluctuation. But in randomized response, this significantly affects your statistical efficiency, or it decreases your effective sample size by a lot. So people are looking for things in between. And recently, there's a lot of interest in the so-called shuffle mode, where you still do a little bit of local randomization, and then you hand your data to a trusted shuffler, and they're going to shuffle your data so that no one can tell who's who. And then the computation comes afterwards. So the computation, the entire process need not to be trusted. The only thing need to be trusted is the shuffling process. And this lies in between local and central model. Recently has used a lot of interest. I hope this serves as a very, very gentle introduction to the models. And hopefully, as a whole, works as an introduction to the differential privacy area. And there are some further readings, just 30 seconds. So this website is a really precious resource. You can find all like the books, blog posts, courses people have taught, and everything. So this is a nice place to look at. And there are two books. One is written by my advisor, Aaron Ross, and the other written by Salil Vadan. If you're a mathematician, I recommend starting from the second, because the first tells you a lot of the backgrounds. It doesn't get to math so quickly. Okay, and please come to our presentation and ask questions. You're going to see a different perspective of the whole story. Okay, thank you. Do we still have time for more questions?
Thanks, Jinshuo. Yes, I think we can take 5 or 10 minutes if there are some more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I can ask one. So differential privacy is normally you have to decide on your parameters first, and then you can't put in an extra use of the data set afterwards. So is that still going to be a challenge in the sorts of situations that you're describing here?
The situation I'm describing, sorry, I don't quite get.
Okay, let me try that again. So with differential privacy, you normally have to set the parameters based on the number of types of calculations you're going to do with a data set, and you can't then add a new calculation later on. Okay, so yeah, that's true. If you add a new calculation, then you're going to increase your parameter and get worse privacy. Yeah, that's true. So in real life, you have to decide more or less all of the the processes that you're going to do with your data before you can work out how to adjust it.
Oh, that's true. I would say that that's in general more or less a disadvantage of this approach. But I remember there are research concerning this question. But at this point, I cannot recall the detail. So
yeah, that's okay. No, I'm sorry, I'm asking you about things that are different. But my background is in official statistics, where those sorts of questions become important if you want to release a general use data set. That's why I ask.
Yeah, maybe we should check how the U.S. Census Bureau is doing.
Yes.
How they are working on it.
Yeah, they certainly have been tackling that problem, and they're using differential privacy on the 2020 census outputs. So they'll have some answers to those types of questions.
In my impression, they are just releasing tons of statistics. So they design everything beforehand.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they have any new insight on this question. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I've given some other folks time to think. So anybody else have a question?
Me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
I have a question about the D and D prime.
D and D prime. Okay.
By definition, they have one record that is different. Does it mean that the number of records in both data sets, the number is the same?
Okay.
Or
so
one just have one more record?
So there are two. So both are, in short, both are possible. Like one is called the replace one neighboring relationship, right? So you just swap out one person, and the other is called the what is that? Add one or remove one neighboring relation, and these are not two different. If you are willing to sacrifice a constant of two, then you can add someone in and remove someone out, and so with two steps of add one, remove one, you get replace one. So both are possible. What makes people comfortable, I guess, is the replace one, right? So your input is always say n by p. You don't have to worry about it. Suddenly it becomes n plus 1 by p or minus 1 by p. So whatever is more comfortable, you can take that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And there's a one in the chat box. For local privacy, if data are already anonymously released after randomization, why need shuffling? Well, so I guess the point is not always. For example, if you hand in your randomized data to the one who does the survey, he actually knows who you are, right? If it's anonymously, well, that can be guaranteed by some physical device. Like if you're voting, then it's automatically anonymized. But if you think about your iPhone, your device is uploading statistics. Well, even after local randomization, the Apple server still can identify who you are. So in that scenario, it's physically not possible to be anonymous. That's what I'm thinking about. That's how I convince myself. Yeah, hopefully answers the question.
Okay, I think at this point it's probably time to wrap up. So I'd just like to thank Jinshuo again for taking the time out to come and give us a gentle introduction to differential privacy. I hope that's been really helpful and that you'll carry on and have a listen to what's going on in the main discussion meeting. I think the main meeting is a separate link, so you will have to exit this one and log in with the new discussion meeting that you have. I'm not sure we have a clapping icon somewhere. There probably is one. I don't find it, but I'm just going to applaud while I'm here. So well done, Jinshuo. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay, and we'll see you all in about 20 minutes. Just time to go and grab a cup of coffee and get set for the main discussion meeting. Thank you very much, and bye-bye for now.